Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. Today, folks, we have Travis Lowdermilk presenting A Developer's Introduction to User-Centered Design. Travis is the author of the brand new O'Reilly book, User-Centered Design, A Developer's Guide to Building User-Friendly Applications. We're very excited to have Travis with us today to present this webcast for you all. Before we get started here, I'd just like to go over some housekeeping. So folks, you'll want to open your group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we can interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions for Travis. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you all to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for Travis, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we know that they're for him and we can make sure he sees it for Q&A. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you'd like to tweet from the Twitter widget today, you may need to give it permission to access your account. It will automatically append the event's hashtag to your tweet so you don't have to. And today our hashtag is User Design, all one word. If you have any problems during the event, please take a look at the Help widget. If you continue to have problems, please post it in the group chat and one of our staff will help you right away. For choppy audio or stalled visuals, please try refreshing your window. And remember, the best thing you can do for a good audio stream is to close any apps that could interfere. People always ask, so we'd like you to know we are recording today's webcast, and we'll have an archive ready usually within 48 hours. And folks, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Travis for his presentation. Hello, Travis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning. This is a topic that I've been very passionate about for some time, and it's just a great opportunity. So special thanks to O'Reilly and Yasmina for making time for us today. They actually do quite a lot of community webcasts and events and things like that. So if you're not seeing that, make sure you head over to O'Reilly.com and check out their community page. So see if we can go to the next slide here. So a little bit about me. I have about 15 years experience creating a variety of applications on various platforms. I focus primarily on the web, but I've also completed projects in mobile and some dabbled in voice and gestures and touch and all those technologies. I develop mostly using the Microsoft platform and tools, building line of business applications for community hospitals. This has given me a unique perspective because I'm able to build applications from end to end, taking abstract user requirements and producing applications, going through testing and design and all that sort of stuff. So I also co-host a weekly internet podcast with my brother, the Windows Developer Show, where we focus on Microsoft development, what they're doing in the space with Windows 8, Windows Phone, Connect, Xbox, Surface, and all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, you should definitely check us out, windowsdevelopershow.com. And as Yasmina said, also have written the book, User-Centered Design, A Developer's Guide to Building User-Friendly Applications. And we'll be talking a little bit about that later on in the presentation. So what are we hoping to learn today? We're going to be discussing some basic concepts as far as usability and user-centered design. And my desire is to get your feet wet with the basic terminology. This is kind of an intro-level explanation. We're also going to be talking about working with users. Obviously, user-centered design is primarily all about working with users. So we're going to be talking about some of the different personalities that we encounter in working with users and how to take those challenges and their difficulties and actually leverage them to your advantage. We'll also be talking about dealing with the negativity. If you're a software developer and you open yourself up to critical feedback, it can be a very negative process if you're not careful. So we'll talk about some tools and some strategies to deal with that. and to help maintain your optimism and not let negative thinking get the better of you. Obviously, with user-centered design, a big part of it is user observation. So we're going to be talking a lot about observing users as they interact with your products. It's an essential practice with user-centered design. So we'll be discussing how to properly conduct a usability study. We'll be discussing a little bit about questionnaires and some other things. And hopefully, if time permits, which I think it will, I'll have some final thoughts, and then we'll open it up to feedback and your questions. I did want to mention that this presentation is really for all types of developers. And if you're not a developer, you're just an enthusiast, you might find some value in what you're doing as well. So I might not hit exactly on the particular development environment that you're in, but my experience has been that these strategies will work if you're building line of business applications, or perhaps you're in the enterprise. Maybe you build mobile or web, or you work on a small software development team or a large development team, or maybe you're just a hobbyist that likes building applications. I think you're going to find some good knowledge in here for you. So let's start with usability. I want to give you just a basic understanding of what we're talking about when we discuss usability and how it relates to user-centered design. Usability is also referred to as human factors, and really stems from human factors. And it's an overall study of how humans relate to any product. So this usability practices could be implemented in everything from a toaster to a doorknob, and frankly, the packaging of both. So it's really studying users as they interact with products. Now, human-computer interaction, or HCI, is rooted in the understanding of usability, but it segments itself by focusing on how humans relate to computing products specifically. So we look at things like ATMs and self-help kiosks and vehicle dashboards, and of course tablet and smartphone technologies. So user-centered design emerged from HCI, and it is a software design methodology that's being used by developers and designers. So it's suffice it to say, essentially, you can say that if you're using user-centered design, you're using it as a way to ensure that your application provides great usability. But really, at the end of the day, with all of this stuff, it's really about solving problems. And I think many developers hear the term user-centered design and they think, oh, I don't do design. I can't concern myself with those sorts of things. And I really need to make it clear that the world of user-centered design is far more than the ability to create an awesome Photoshop composition or having stellar graphic design sense. Really, user-centered design is about looking and observing and being attentive to problems and trying to figure out unique ways to solve them. And frankly, as developers, we do this every day, right? We just predominantly look for those problems and those patterns in code. So what is the best way to solve usability problems? And I have a simple presumption. In fact, I wrote the entire book about this presumption, and that is I believe that in order to build products that users love, we really need to be cognizant about bringing them in and including them in the process of building those products. So it seems like a simple idea, but it really is extremely difficult to execute on. I think oftentimes developers say, oh, we really appreciate feedback because it's something that I think we feel like we're supposed to say, right? But the problem is that we end up treating that feedback like a bug report, right? We focus on software bugs that need to be fixed, and we don't oftentimes ask questions about workflow and ease of use and whether or not the application is easy to remember how to use, what we call memorability, or is it easy to learn how to use if you've never seen it before? We call that learnability. And then that really is the crux of user-centered design. actively making the user a part of the development process while you're making the app. And that's key, while you're making it, not after you finished it, but throughout the whole process. So it's not just collect what your users say is broken in the application and then go out and fix it. It's continually checking in with your users to ensure that your application and the changes that you're making are actually providing the value that you intended. So in order to really understand user-centered design, I think it's easier to take it from the advantage point of saying what user-centered design is not. It isn't usability. So it's not just usability, and we've talked about this, but user-centered design is a methodology. It's a series of activities that ensure that you are getting valuable feedback from your users and ultimately bringing about great usability in your products. This is a comment that I hear every now and again, and this belief that somehow usability or user-centered design is subjective. Whatever I think is very usable, somebody else might think is not very usable. But actually, user-centered design works against subjectivity because it relies heavily on being able to scientifically prove your assumptions. So, in fact, it's really all about testing assumptions. So you can't just say, oh, well, I think we should put the shopping cart icon at the top right of the screen because it looks better there, right? You have to actually test whether or not users respond favorably to that decision. And we've already kind of talked about this, but it bears repeating. User-centered design is not just design. And as we all know, something can be stunning or beautiful to look at, but if it doesn't meet its core purpose or function, then the design is irrelevant. The aesthetic is irrelevant. That's not to say that design and aesthetics aren't important. They do play a role in usability, as we well know. If things aren't appealing and easy to find and laid out correctly, then they can be a usability nightmare. But we've all used applications that look beautiful but are very difficult to use. User-centered design is not a waste of time. This is another kind of thing that I run up against with developers. They say, well, I just don't have time to do all this stuff. I would ask them, how many of them have spent days, weeks, or even months building an application or building something only to find out when they delivered it that's not what the user really wanted or really needed. So I would argue that by doing user-centered design, you prevent yourself from doing that, and you actually save time over the long haul. User-centered design is not a distraction. So I think that some developers need to really move from the mindset that if they're not writing code, then the application isn't progressing, right? My belief is that if you're using user-centered design and you're taking time to really talk to your users and spend that time exploring the problem space up front, rather than attacking code first, you're far less prone to distraction. I find that when I jump right into the code, I'm far more distracted because I don't ultimately know where I'm headed. So I'll be honest. Working with users is not easy, right? The reality is that in order to make great products, we need to be able to constructively work with them, right? And a lot of developers, including myself, need to continually work on those soft skills. We need to be better listeners. We need to be better observers. We need to be attentive. We need to practice empathy and concern ourselves what our users think, right? What motivates them, what's frustrating them. And not only for our products, but I always make it a practice to ask about other things that they're using. If I see a user using a smartphone, I might ask them about it and see, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. But working with users can be intimidating. It opens us up to the potential horde of feedback that we may get, and it all can seem very overwhelming. So I wanted to take a moment and talk about some user personalities that I've come in contact with that I find it can be difficult, and strategies on how to deal with them. So I've given them names. This person is the information overloader, and these folks come to meetings with stacks of memos and emails. When you first sign on for the project, they want to give you the entire history of the problem, including pictures of their family vacations. I mean, they want you to know everything there is to know, right? And they CC you on long email chains without any explanation of what's going on. And they call you every time that they have a new idea that they want you to consider. And I think the point needs to be made that, really their heart is in the right place, right? They just want to make sure that you have all the information that you need in order to make a great product. So they're not going to leave any stone unturned. And we have to find a way to positively channel that energy. So what I like to do is I like to continually teach them what are the best ways to communicate with you. When they call on the phone and they have this really great idea and they want to talk to you about it right now, you might say, well, this all sounds great, but could you send that in an email, because that way I can have it documented, these types of things. It can be frustrating, but we do need to teach them the proper way to give us information, and we need to explain to them what information we're looking for. So if they're providing you detail that's not necessary or isn't helpful, there is a way to politely let them know, I can't use that, or here's why that information doesn't help me, but here's what I do need to know. So we want to positively reinforce them when they give us the information in the format that we need, and then we also need to educate them about the information that doesn't help us. But really, at the end of the day, this is a great problem to have. These are some of our best users because they have a lot of information to share and they're motivated to do it. So we want to be careful not to discourage them. We definitely want to leverage them and get their help. The next person I think we've all come in contact with is the good old classic control freak. They want to be involved in every aspect of the project. They get upset when they're not included in every decision. They exert their presence in meetings and will often derail them with an inability to move on after a decision's been made. And more often than not, I find that the need to control comes from a place of insecurity, right? And so if we have the time and we're willing to invest, I would really encourage you to spend time with them outside of the group and really try to get to the center of their concerns. And I think what you might find is that you really are on the same team. You both want the application or the product to be successful. The other strategies that you can use is certainly inclusion, giving them the appearance of being included. Make sure to invite them to meetings and acknowledge them and ask their opinion ahead of time so that they feel like they're being included. And if that doesn't work, you can always just put them to work, right? You can give them tasks that don't have a major impact on the overall project or application so that they can feel like they own a portion of it and they're contributing. Now, this next persona is a concept that I stole from author Tom Kelly from the book, The 10 Faces of Innovation, IDEO Strategies for Beating the Devil's Advocate. And IDEO, some of you may be familiar with, is a pretty well-known design firm. But these folks I find the most difficult to deal with, and they actually make me feel like Al Pacino here sometimes. But essentially, these are people that have no problem telling you why your idea isn't going to work, right? You spend all this time, putting together this beautiful presentation of the direction that you think the application should head, and they just spend an hour making it Swiss cheese. And of course, they don't have any ideas of how it will work, but they have plenty of ways to tell you why your idea is not going to work. And oftentimes they'll make anecdotal statements that really aren't backed by any meaningful data. And they do all of this under the guise of playing the devil's advocate. They'll say, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. If we change the UI the way that you're suggesting, I'm going to tell you right now, our users are going to hate it. They'll refuse to use it. And of course, it's not them that's saying this. They're just advocating on the behalf of the devil. So this can be really, really challenging to deal with. Tom Kelly's book actually focuses on how to deal with this type of personality. And Kelly suggests one way is you can take other team members and give them specific roles or personas to play or be responsible for. And I'll give you an example of a few of them. One is, he calls it the anthropologist. And this person would be in charge of observing behaviors both out with users and out in the world, as it were, and reporting back to the team. The next role would be the experimenter. They test new ideas and assumptions, so their job is to kind of maybe build early prototypes and go out there and test them and then come back to the group and report what they found. Another role is cross-pollinator, and this person actually observes other industries and what maybe competitors are doing and looks at other applications that are analogous to the project that you're working on and letting folks know about that. So each persona is responsible for advocating their role and reporting back to the team. So ideally, if this is working correctly, the next time you hear the devil's advocate say something like, well, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. If you change the UI layout, all of our users are going to be confused and frustrated. Ideally, you'll have someone on your team who is playing the role of anthropologist pipe up and say, well, I'm going to play the anthropologist for a second. I've actually observed our users when they're using the current UI, and I can tell you most of them are already confused and frustrated already. So these, by using these different roles on the team, you might have folks that are feeling more compelled to speak up and challenge the devil's advocate. With all that said, I think one of the major reasons why developers shy away from users or interacting with users is frankly to avoid negativity. Bottom line, it's very difficult to hear that our ideas aren't working or that the application we build didn't meet the need. It certainly can reduce our morale and make it difficult to maintain our motivation to continually get back in there and write more code. So I think the first thing that needs to be said is, as developers, we really need to go easier on ourselves. Most of the time, when our application doesn't meet the user's need, I found it's not because of a personal failure. It's not because we didn't know how to execute the right code or that sort of thing. It's that we simply failed to capture the right information. We failed to ask the right questions. And one idea or notion is, what if we were to change our focus? So in the book Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard, Chip and Dan Heath, their brothers, wrote this book, and they presented an idea of actually changing your focus on focusing on what is working versus what is failing. So an example of this, what if we were to look at our project and we write down the bug list, but in addition to writing down the bug list of things that need to be fixed, we also write down a list of things that are working very well. And we actually detail, well, why are they working well, and how can we use that understanding in other areas. So, for instance, if we built an online shopping cart experience that users actually responded very favorably to, could we repurpose what we learned from that on another project, perhaps for a hotel reservation or a visitor kiosk? So the point here is, I think oftentimes as developers, we're so used to working with bug lists that we never really take stock of the things that we did right and the things that worked and how we might use them for future projects. So I think these are ways that we can certainly stem some of that reduction in morale as we get negative feedback. But I think it's important to note another aspect of negativity that I have encountered, and that is the negativity that we as developers bring to the table, right? If you go to any developer user group or community group, I can guarantee you'll find a group of developers lamenting about the proverbial stupid user, right? They say things like, oh, they just don't get it, or they'll never understand how this works, no matter how easy it is, or they're just being lazy. And although some of that may be true, I do find that that they may be exercising the fundamental attribution error. And what this is Lee Ross, a Stanford psychologist, defines it as the error lies in our inclination to attribute people's behavior to the way they are rather than the situation that they're in. So instead of assuming your users are lazy or dumb, consider that your application may not be providing what they need to produce the desired behavior. Again, this is a change in the way we choose to view the challenge, right? And we can either blame the users or we can spend time getting to the heart of their complaints. So an example of this, let's assume you are getting reports that users aren't logging out of the system appropriately, and this is leaving their session open and creating an error when they go back to log in, right? Now, you could choose to believe that the users are just stupid or lazy, or that they just, frankly, choose to not log out, right? Or you could choose to better understand the workflow, and this is where user-centered design kind of comes into play. You could go look at their work environment. Perhaps their work environment is not conducive to remembering to log out. They've got lots of phone calls, or they're continually walking away from the desk, or they're getting lots of interruptions. Perhaps the application is laid out in such a way, design-wise, that makes it hard to find the logout button or makes it less intuitive. Or we could take it to a completely higher level and say, well, gee, based on the workflow and what these folks are up against, it's just not realistic to expect them to log out, so I'm going to build an auto logout feature that essentially nullifies the issue completely. So these are the kinds of things and the way you should be thinking when you're approaching user-centered design. So overall, how do we prevent ourselves from this negative thinking? And I think in the business of building software, it's pretty easy to beat yourself up and get pretty down. I hear a lot of developers just throw in the towel, and they say things like, I can't do design, or I can't build what they've built. I don't have time to learn all the things that they know. I got to write code. And some of that can be true, but I think it's easy to look at products like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Groupon, and on and on and on, and think that creating software is all about the big idea, right? As developers, I think we mistakenly believe that, like Newton, the apple is going to fall from the tree and hit developers on the head and magically usher in a digital revolution. And so I see developers waiting for the apple to hit them too, and I think, gee, if they just spent some time with people, they probably would get there faster, right? So if we've only seen the high points of someone's application and none of their mistakes along the way, it's easy for us to believe that this developer, like a Mark Zuckerberg, just happened on to a great idea, right? And I think Leonardo da Vinci, for instance, is a great example of this. He had notebooks full of sketches and drawings for his work on The Last Supper. And, he didn't just sit down one day and paint this masterpiece. He actually spent years sketching and erasing and redrawing different ideas and concepts. And most of us aren't even aware of these early sketches. All we hear about is, of course, the final painting that has been adored by millions. And I've heard a quote that sums this up really nicely, and I had to actually trace it all the way back to a pastor by the name of Steve Furtick, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially he says, don't mistake someone's highlight reel for their behind-the-scenes video. So the point is this. I would encourage you to not think of the building application process as a straight line from A to B. It can take years of observation and study to lead you to those breakthrough moments. So your process really should be a curvy line from A to B to E, back to A again, and it's moved so many times that you've lost track. My feeling is that if you're doing great software development, that's how it looks. So how do we get there? Observation, like I was saying earlier, is a big part of that. User-centered design is more than just working directly with the users and collecting their feedback. It's a whole series of tools that you can use to observe their behavior. And my feeling is a large part of user-centered design is almost anthropologic in practice. You can learn a great deal simply by watching users out in the wild instead of just listening to them. I'll oftentimes watch folks use a self-checkout kiosk, for instance, and see what mistakes they make and why they were able to get through there quickly, or why did they seem like they were frustrated, and those types of things. I'm very kind of cognizant of that. And really, I like to think of a great user-centered designer like Diane Fossey, the world-renowned naturalist activist. Many of you know her as a primatologist who literally lived with mountain gorillas in Rwanda to better understand their behavior. And she, of course, gave us unprecedented access into the world of these primates, and we've actually learned a great deal about their culture and primatology. And her story was later featured in the movie Gorillas in the Mist, where she was played by actress Sigourney Weaver. So like Fossey, we need to be actively watching and observing our users. We need to pick up on their subtle cues. What mistakes are they making, and why do they make them? How do they interpret the workflow of our application? Are they interpreting it correctly? Is it accurate? Or do they have a complete misconception of how our application works? So there's a variety of ways that we can obtain this holistic view of user interaction, and you can see the list here. So let's go over some of these in a little bit of a greater detail. So usability studies, of course, sometimes referred to as user testing, are definitely the most popular method in the UCD toolbox. And as we discussed, usability studies use metrics obtained from direct observation of users to make conclusions on a variety of different things. It could be measuring the effectiveness of the application. Is it really bringing about the behavior or the intention of why we built the application? And there really are a number of ways that you can qualify or quantify effectiveness. You might choose to measure the number of errors that a user makes in trying to complete a task, or how long it takes a user to complete a task, assuming that speed and efficiency is something that you're really desiring in your application. Or you can combine these studies with questionnaires and asking them to rate their overall experience, rate how well the application responded to their needs, would they recommend the application to their friends or colleagues, and this sort of thing. Now, there's a great deal of literature on conducting usability studies, but here are some high-level tips. And really, you can get started with this today. It doesn't take all that much as far as resource, just your time. But ideally, you want to position yourself behind or sit to the side of the user. And the reason why you do this is I find that if the user can see me, they get distracted. So sometimes I'll sit behind or off to the side, depending on the nature of the application I'm watching them use. You may choose to select a secluded environment, or you may decide to do more of an in-the-wild study where you actually put the user in their everyday environment with phones ringing or kids screaming and that sort of thing, and see how the application performs. Some folks like to actually record with video or audio. It's a great way to capture everything, but I do think it comes at a cost. I find that most subjects are just simply uncomfortable when they see a camera. They just don't like the feel of being recorded. But the most important thing that you can do, even in conducting a very informal usability study, is you really need to remind your subjects to talk out loud. Essentially, you want them to describe each step and what they are intending to do. And the reason why you do this is you want to be sure that what you're observing them doing is and taking notes on is accurate. So most users will feel very uncomfortable doing this. They feel like they're just babbling and they're not saying anything useful, but we want them babbling. That's exactly what we want. We want to be able to pick up on their stream of consciousness and their subtle comments. I get a great deal of information when users are kind of just talking out loud and explaining the steps. So I I like to bring along a notepad so I can write down everything I see in here. Laptops are fine, but I find that the typing ends up cueing the user that you're taking notes, and I've literally seen users kind of scrunch up when I start typing because they feel like, oh, I did something wrong. Now he's taking notes about how stupid I am, So I find that the notepad's a little quieter, and frankly, it's just quicker. You can draw or do sketches or take notes very quickly. So again, another reason to sit beside or behind the user is you definitely don't want to tip them off when they're taking notes. Here's another thing I definitely recommend is creating a script ahead of time so that you can ensure that you're conducting the study identically with each subject. You're giving them the same instructions. You're giving them the same language. And you want to also include language that explains what you plan to use the study for. And here's a huge tip here is make it clear to the user that it's not them that's being tested. I don't know how many times I tell users, listen, we're testing the application, we're not testing, you and your performance. They still feel like they're taking a final exam and they get very nervous. So you'll want to continually reiterate in your script that it's the application's performance that's being tested. I actually usually avoid terminology like test or exam. I use things like study or observation. So no matter how many times you tell users, they're still going to feel like they're being tested. And also, don't wait till the end. I find a lot of developers will do a great deal of development, and then they want to start conducting usability studies. If your project is already far along, certainly you can start a usability study now, but I would encourage you to start very early on. And I think this is a great example of it. I found this picture when I was preparing this presentation, and there's a great usability study being conducted with no more than some paper and a dry erase board. It looks like it's some form of dashboard that they're testing out, and they've literally got the user sitting in front of there pressing different pieces of paper. And I think this is a really great way to approve assumptions before you actually go and write code. So you have a fundamental understanding of where the application is headed, and you'll save yourself some time. So aside from observing users directly, you can also, of course, do surveys, and these are certainly a very common tool. And they're great for their ability to reach many people without a huge amount of time investment. And you can certainly use websites like SurveyMonkey.com are very popular to put together, a 10-question survey fairly easy. The downside, though, I find with surveys is they offer very little depth when compared to the actual face-to-face observation time with users. So you may get more respondents with the survey, but you're not going to get the level of depth that you will by sitting with the user. And oftentimes I find that with my surveys is sometimes I find that I'm more confused, and I find myself in a cycle of having more questions than answers. So I'll get a survey response back, and I'll go, well, gee, that's not what I expected. Okay, so maybe I asked the question wrong, or maybe this is actually the truth. I don't know. Did I conduct the study wrong? So it can be very tricky with questionnaires. It's not as simple as just throwing out some questions and seeing what kind of response you get back. And, of course, reaching the right people is one of those. So if you're doing a study, for instance, about you want to do a study of seniors using an online medical benefits program, you may not want to just send the questionnaire via email because that might give you a sample of those seniors that are using email and are already familiar with the computer and comfortable with the computer. That might not be representative of the target that you're looking for. And, of course, it makes sense to ask the right questions, right, in the right way. And so let's talk about that for a second. So as far as questions are concerned, I prefer the Likert scale. And these are questions that can be rated, we've seen this all before. You have excellent to poor and these kinds of things. But what's cool about the Likert scale is that you can do a range of value types. So you can do satisfaction. So you can ask them, are they very satisfied or unsatisfied? You can do statements and then have a sense of agreement. So you make a statement and then you have the respondent say they strongly or agree or disagree with that statement. You can ask frequency questions. You can say, are you using it every day or once a month? And the benefit of this, of the Likert scale, is that it gives you a sense of quality or amount, the feeling that the user has in their response. But whatever scale you choose to use or format that you choose to use, I would encourage you to remain consistent. That helps avoid confusion while going from question to question. You can shake things up a little bit, so if you're doing the kind of statement response, agreement response type survey, you can have both positive and negative statements to see if they're kind of paying attention. But again, you always have that notion in the back of your mind that maybe they didn't read the question or they didn't understand or that sort of thing. One thing to be aware of is something called acquiescence bias, and this is the notion that people tend to give you the answer they believe you will be most pleased with. So folks, for the most part, have a tendency to agree, especially when they have lukewarm feelings on the matter. They'll tend to strongly agree with something just because they don't really care either way. So, and additionally, most people feel anxiety when they're being in disagreement or causing confrontation. So one way to circumvent that is by using clear and neutral language. For example, let's say you've created a messaging add-on to a CRM system. Now, if you were going to conduct a survey on that, you might be tempted to frame the question in terms of agreement. So you might say something like, the messaging add-on is a valuable tool. Do you strongly agree or do you strongly disagree? But what if every person in the organization that was trained on the new messaging tool was told time and again that this is going to be a very valuable tool for them? So perhaps trainers kind of really beat that in their head, and it's possible that they may respond by agreeing with the fact that the messaging add-on is valuable because that's what they were told during training. But it is possible, however, that they aren't even using the tool. So in this case, because the user actually believes that the add-on is valuable, we can't actually assume that they're using it. So instead, what we might do is ask it as a frequency question. I use the messaging feature throughout the day or never. Excuse me. This way, we're not leading the respondent to a vague response. We're simply asking them whether or not they're actually using the messaging add-on. So in this example, we're choosing to let the behavior speak for itself. If an overwhelming majority of users are using the messaging add-on throughout the day, then I think it's safe that we can assume that this add-on that we've built is pretty valuable to them. If they're not using it, then we may have to start over and question some of our earlier assumptions. Another method that you can use to learn more about your users is task analysis. This is observing users just like you would do in a usability study, but the focus is far more on the task the user is completing. It's not as formal as a usability study, and it's used to understand how you can either replicate or improve the task that they're performing. Now, this doesn't actually require direct observation, although that's encouraged, but you could always just have a meeting with users that complete the task and have them describe their workflow. The actual added benefit of task analysis is that you may actually learn that users don't need an application. In other words, it may be a logistical or a political or human problem that your application just simply can't fix. So there's often times where I've been requested to build an application, and after speaking with the users about their task, I find out, well, gee, it sounds like this is a logistical problem, and obviously software can only do so much. Another method is the heuristic evaluation, and this is a process where you review an application against a predetermined set of guidelines. Now, many of us do this now already with design guidelines. Microsoft, Apple, Google, they all have detailed guidelines on how an app should look and perform. And in some cases, the apps will not be approved for the marketplace if they don't adhere to these guidelines. So hopefully we're already doing this now. Now, Jacob Nielsen pioneered this method. He's the co-founder of the Nielsen-Norman Group and is considered the foremost expert in usability evaluation. Now, that's not to say he is without controversy. Besides this picture here, people believe he favors functionality a little too much. I've seen folks say that he leaves little room for designers and aesthetics, and you can see this as evidence if you head over to his website, useit.com. His primary focus is that he strictly adheres to the usability, and that's the way I kind of like to think about him, is that he is purely focused and only cares about whether or not an application meets its intended design. And so he's just an interesting perspective. So if you're not following him or his work, I would encourage you to take a look at it. Another way we can do or spend time with users is much like usability studies or interviews. They allow you to have a direct interaction with the user, but instead of observing their behavior, the purpose is really just to collect thoughts, comments, and suggestions. And there's really two types of interview styles. There's the structured or formal, and this is more rigid. It's focused on being consistent. So again, you might want to have a script where it's very important to ask the same questions in the same order in the same way. And this is done typically in that traditional question-answer format. And this is a great tool when you're trying to reach consensus on a specific issue. Should we implement this feature or should we not? Now, the opposite of that would be the unstructured or informal interview. And this has a far more discussion feel. You're purposely leaving questions open-ended so that you can get a lot of feedback, and you're just kind of gently guiding the conversation. And this is actually really great during the early stages of your project when you're still trying to get a feel for the problem space and what this application might actually deliver. So you're going to want to let users speak freely and filter out what's useful for you and what's not. But remember, like questionnaires, you've got to pick the right people and ask the right questions. Another method that's becoming more and more popular is A/B testing, which really relegates the design decisions to data decisions. So essentially, the method that produces the desired result is the winner, and therefore user behavior is really the only deciding factor here. So this is very popular at Google, and other sites are starting to implement this. I'll give you an example. I use the Bing search engine, and one day I logged on and I saw that the traditional magnifying glass search button had been changed to a button that read search explicitly. And it was pretty clear that they were probably testing whether or not more users would click on that button if it actually read search versus having the iconography of a magnifying glass. Throughout the day it was there, and then later in the day it switched back off. So you keep your eye out for this sort of thing. If you see websites are changing in subtle ways, it's very possible that they're doing this form of A/B testing. I think the challenge with doing too much A/B testing is that over time it's difficult to build intuition about your users. You're leaning too heavy on the data making the decision. Did they click this more or did they click that more? And that sort of thing, that you don't actually learn about what motivates your users and what do they want. And of course, sometimes design decisions don't always just break down evenly black versus white. We either do this or we either do that. Sometimes they're very complex and full of nuance. Another method that I like to use while creating an app is storyboarding. And really, when you think about it, creating apps is much like creating movies, right? So each application has a story to tell, and there's various screens to tell that story, or in the analogy of movies, various scenes, right? So what we want to do is tell the story graphically from beginning to end. And so storyboards help you lay out the application and identify all the available workflows. Sometimes it's really hard to remember all the paths that your application can take. We sometimes miss obvious flows. For instance, we focus so much on how the user is going to log in and what that experience is going to look like that we forget how they're going to log out, those types of things. So storyboarding is great in a sense that it helps you focus or at least observe the higher level view of the application process. So, as we all know, programming and coding is a very in-the-weeds process. So it's helpful to return to the storyboard every now and again and make sure that aggregately we're all still heading in the right direction. And storyboards are a great way to use as a tool to get users involved. Your users will tell you if you show them the storyboard if you've missed a spot or you didn't think of a particular workflow. And actually drawing can be a great way for users to communicate as well. I had a user once so exacerbated with me in trying to explain what it was that she wanted that she actually grabbed the pen from me and started drawing it, and then we were able to really get down to what she was talking about. Another form to get user feedback is by building prototypes. And I think the challenge with prototypes and, frankly, user-centered design in general is that it removes this notion of the big reveal, right? That part of that unmistakable high that we get as developers of showing off the finished product, right? And it's almost like we feel like there's bad luck if the user sees any form of the application before it's ready. And I think more now than ever you're seeing this culture being promoted at companies like Apple and Microsoft where everything is under lock and key. I think for us as developers, we need to start getting a little bit more comfortable with allowing our users to evaluate our early ideas. And a prototype can allow users to play and interact with some assumptions that we have and see what they think. So, of course, unlike Microsoft and Apple, many of us don't have large teams and testing labs, so we really can't afford to head in the wrong direction. And so that early insight is going to be key, and prototypes can help you do that. Now, we do need to make sure, because we're developers, that our early work remains only a prototype. The challenge that I find with programmers doing prototype is they start writing code for the prototype, and before they know it, they are building these very elaborate projects. Prototypes can be built on paper. They can use basic HTML, JavaScript, and actually there's some programs, Acture RP and Balsamic are two programs that do a really great job of just focusing on the prototype experience. Billy Hollis, a developer evangelist who promotes good UX practices in the Tennessee area, he's featured in my book, and he had a great quote. He said, if you've got unit testing in your prototype, you're doing it wrong. And I couldn't agree more with that. So let's sum up here with some final thoughts. I think no discussion about user experience or design would be complete, of course, without mentioning this gentleman, Mr. Jobs. And I think one quote I often hear summarized or paraphrased in the opposition of what I'm proposing, working with users, is what he said in a 1998 article in Bloomberg Businessweek. Jobs said that it's really hard to design products by focus groups. A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them. I hear this quite a bit from developers as an excuse for why they don't engage users. They just say, hey, like Jobs said, users don't know what they want. We have to show them. And I absolutely agree that some designers and developers have a natural intuition. Jobs certainly personifies that. But I think we also need to be realistic that many of us don't have that intuition, and users may not be able to express what they need, but that doesn't mean that their comments and their behaviors and their suggestions are less valuable to us. So I would really encourage you, as we conclude here, to start thinking a little outside the box, right? Think about the different ways that users communicate, that they tell us what works and what doesn't. Body language, verbal, actual behaviors, and explore the ways that you can better understand what they're telling you. Try different methods. Don't just use surveys, for instance. Use a combination of surveys and actually going out into the wild and observing their behavior. Now, I know some of you may recoil at the thought of this, but you might actually try creative experiences like sketching an idea in a notepad. Drawing uses the right side of your brain, and coding, of course, uses the more logic-oriented left brain. I find that sometimes when I'm struggling with a problem, if I sketch it out, I'm drawing upon my more abstract thinking patterns for my right side, and I'm actually surprised by some of the ideas that surface when I explore them in that other way. And don't be afraid, of course, to observe what others are doing. So this notion of, don't spend time recreating the wheel. A guy by the name of Austin Kleon wrote a book about this process, and the book is called Steal Like an Artist, The 10 Things Nobody Told You About Being Creative. And he's got a great quote. He says, if we're free from the burden of trying to be completely original, we can stop trying to make something out of nothing, and we can embrace influence instead of running away from it. And I really found this pretty profound, and I can't agree more. I think many developers are often stubborn with borrowing from others, like they somehow are cheating if they build upon something that is already working. So you begin to see them do silly things like reinvent ways of basic software paradigms, but they're not making them any better. So the user has to essentially relearn how to do basic tasks because they decided to do something different. So you want to start looking at other products and continuing asking yourself, why was it a success, why was it a failure, and that sort of thing. So sometimes it's important to spend time thinking about things that have no relation to the project that you're working on. Daniel Pink, in his book Drive, actually covered this. He covered a software development company called Atlassian, and they had something that they called FedEx Days. And they've since renamed it the Ship It Days because FedEx was all up in arms, but that's a whole other story. They essentially give their their employees 24 hours to work on anything. And the only requirement is that they share their experience with the team the next day. And this can be anything from a woodworking project to hang gliding, or whatever they come up with, as long as there's some sort of meaningful lesson that they can share with the group. And some of us have heard Google, of course, has the 20% time where they allow engineers to spend 20% of their time working on whatever project they want. Gmail was a product that came out of that 20% time. So these are really great ways to explore other industries and different ways to approach problem solving, and they may help you gain new insight on how to approach the problem in your current projects. But, at the very least, I would encourage you after this presentation, if you're working on a project, to spend some time digging up the design guidelines. A lot of this stuff has already been done for you by the platform companies that you're using. Microsoft and Google and Apple, they all invest heavily in sharing the knowledge of what works on their platform. So if you're building for iOS, Android, Windows, or any of those types of platforms, I'd really encourage you to take a look at the design guidelines. I'd also encourage you to take a look at my book. We discover all the topics that you've heard today. We explore them, obviously, in much more detail. You can find it, of course, on O'Reilly, or you can use my bit.ly short link, bit.ly/userdesign. And we have more detail about usability and the user-centered design process. We have discussions about the planning and software development lifecycle, ways that you can boost your creativity, and we actually cover some design principles that are pretty popular, and we didn't get a chance to talk about those today. The book is available in early release, so you can actually download the latest version today. There's over 100 pages with interviews and examples, and you'll actually get updates as I release them. So your book will always stay up to date. And if you use the promo code DevShow here, you're going to get 50% off the ebook and then 40% off the print version when it becomes available in the spring of next year. So I'd really encourage you to possibly consider that, and certainly, like any good user-centered designer, I would love to hear your feedback on the book, how I can make it better, and I really kind of see the book as a conversation that we're all having about this particular topic. So with that said, I want to, again, thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. Again, thanks to O'Reilly for giving me the opportunity. It certainly has been a pleasure. I'm all over the interwebs, so you can find me on Twitter there, or my website, or you can check us out each week on the WindowsDeveloperShow.com. Thanks again.
Travis, outstanding webcast presentation. Thank you so much for your time and for presenting for us all today. Folks, time is winding down here pretty quickly, and I know several of you do have questions, and Travis, as you can imagine, we do have several questions that have come in. We'll take as many questions as we have time for, so Travis, if you are still available to be with us, if you can take a peek and maybe answer just a couple, I think our audience would greatly appreciate it.
I see one here by Andrew. The tools that I was talking about for building prototypes, one that I use is Axure. It's A-X-U-R-E. The product's actually called Axure RP. And the other one that's pretty popular, and I haven't used it, but it's called Balsamiq. What's really great about these, if you're a developer, especially Microsoft developer, it's very tempting to load up Visual Studio to build a prototype. And the problem I find is that it's almost too much, and it's too tempting to start writing code and start building the final product. Where these applications are really great for really just focusing on the core things that you need for prototyping. So that's Axure, A-X-U-R-E, and Balsamiq. Let's see here. I'm just going to scroll down. Any guidelines, gotchas when targeting really young users, in particular any case studies for educational applications targeting kids? Not that I'm aware of. I did have a fellow graduate student that actually wrote a piece on that particular topic. So if you want to do me a favor and send me an email, you can actually send it to the email that you see on the screen there, and I'll see if I can't put you in contact with that person. Is there not a problem of creating a middle-of-the-road response and best to have an even number of responses? Not sure. Okay, how do you deal with selection bias and users who are self-conscious about being observed? Yeah, the selection bias is a difficult one. Certainly, being aware of your target audience of what you're trying to build. Something that we didn't talk about in the session, but I talk about in the book, is building a persona and taking the time to actually go through and think about the user that you're building the application for, and actually write down things, kind of what may seem arbitrary, but personality traits. What other tools are they using? You essentially make this fictional user up in your mind of all the things that they like and dislike and that sort of thing. That might help get you a better understanding. Obviously social networks are great to open you up to the wider audience. Twitter and Facebook, I've used them before, and expanding my reach. But as far as the specifics, other than the common sense stuff like not polling any particular people with a specific interest or that sort of thing, it can be a very challenging exercise. One question from Floyd: have you had users record their mouse movements and voice with screen capture software? I haven't actually done that yet. I know there's a great deal of software products that are starting to emerge on the market that do eye tracking and mouse movement. I haven't invested in those tools, but I know they're becoming very popular. And they're also a great way to, again, record users without them being, without the camera being in their face. Of course, you always want to let users know if they're being recorded, but it's a way for them to kind of forget that and behave normally, if you will. One question by Andrew. Again, the design phase is typically driven by the business analysts on the project. So the developers per se would not be tasked with optimizing the design and conducting usability tests, right? Or is it the assumption here that there are no business analysts on the project? Well, so here is actually a great question, and that is really how a variety of different organizations handle this notion of usability and user-centered design. Now, obviously, every organization is different. My experience is that this is still fairly emerging, and so many organizations aren't even really aware of these practices. I would argue that if you're in a particular organization where business analysts are the ones who are making those decisions, then it behooves you to understand what they're learning out there in the field or how they're making their decisions. Because ultimately you're the one who's going to have to write the code to bring about what they're telling you. So again, I don't know the nuances of your organization or if it would make sense for you to participate in usability tests, but I would certainly encourage it. I don't see how that would hurt you if they're willing to allow you to do that. David writes here, user-centered design is a great idea, but I see problems when your users are physically or virtually located a long way from the developers and are on a different network. What sort of tools can you use to help with this isolation? Again, as far as observing them. That's a great point. There are tools, again, that do mouse movement tracking and that sort of thing. You can always do, remote dial-in tools. There's a variety of different remote desktop tools, and then just have the study over the phone, and you're actually watching them click, and they're talking out loud. Not ideal, of course, because you can't pick up on those subtle body language cues, but it's certainly better than nothing. Question from James. Actually, user-centered design is becoming a cornerstone of innovation generally. Your thoughts? I definitely feel like usability certainly is becoming far more popular. I'm seeing a lot of interest through the show from fellow developers who are starting to kind of wake up to this process of having great usability and great design in their applications, because they're seeing that their peers and their colleagues are actually becoming very successful building fantastic apps that are intuitive and easy to learn and easy to use. So we do get a lot of feedback through the show where folks are wanting to learn more about this, and that's actually what kind of stemmed me to write the book and actually take the time to explore this topic even more. It's obviously a very vast discipline. It involves a great deal of everything from fine art to anthropology, psychology, and that's what kind of makes it pretty exciting. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, I think, for folks that are willing to spend time understanding this stuff and learning how to use the tools. And I certainly would hope that this might spur you on to continue exploring this topic. And certainly, by all means, as you learn things or you see things that interest you, please send them over to Twitter or via email. I'd love to hear from you.
All right. With that, Travis, again, we're going to say a very big thank you to you for presenting such an outstanding webcast for us all today. Folks that attended, thank you for attending, and we hope you benefited from it. And a big thank you to those of you that sent in your questions, because having those questions just adds so much more to our events, and we do appreciate it. We'd like to let you all know that we did push out a code in your group chat, so if you haven't opened that group chat, please do. Some valuable information there to save you some money on Travis's book. It is an early release, so there's lots and lots of pages already available for you. If you like what you heard today, you need to get the book. Lots more coming that's really going to help you with your day-to-day, so we have a special offer to save you some money to get the book and encourage you to really get into it. We know you like what you heard today, because those comments just coming in through the group chat are outstanding, Travis. Many people really appreciate it, what you've talked about today. So glad we can make it happen for the audience. Again, we thank you, Travis. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude our webcast today. Goodbye, everybody.
Pardon me, Travis. Travis, are you on the line?